Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you guys are. I'm going to put a link to our shared notes doc here, and we'll probably continue to share that as people join in. And let me get my presentation. Oh, that's actually, oh yeah, that's it. Let me just get my presentation going. There we go. Okay, are you guys seeing what looks like a presentation? All right, thanks, Paul. Well, welcome to the Biodiversity Crisis Response Sessional Committee meeting here today. What we'd like to do today is just tell you a little bit about this committee, what we've been up to, and hopefully leave lots of time for discussion. And we feel like there's been a lot of interesting discussions happening in the community. So hopefully you have some ideas and thoughts, and we'll provide some guiding questions as well. So it's no secret that biodiversity is in crisis around the world. And the big question now is, what can we do about it? In this figure from the Convention on Biological Diversity, they outline some really big, broad steps, things like reduced consumption or sustainable production that can help to ameliorate some of the biodiversity loss that we're experiencing. And as a committee, we're thinking about what as a society, what as individuals within the museum collections community, what even personally, given our expertise, we can do to stop the biodiversity crisis, or to at least make steps in the opposite direction. So our charge, which was set up by Barbara Tiers when she was president a couple of years ago, was to consider what, if anything, SPNHC should do to raise the profile of collections in mitigating biodiversity loss, both scientific and public awareness aspects, make recommendations for activities that could accomplish this, to propose strategies to help collections highlight their own efforts in this area, and to propose short and long-term goals for involvement in this topic. And I'll just mention that in the last couple of years since the sessional committee was established, we are in the process of making steps towards thinking about being a standing committee, and so some of these points will be developed further to that point. In the next number of slides, I'm going to lay out some activities to date, and then pass the mic on to some of the folks on the committee who have been most active in some of these areas, and hopefully they are all in the room. If not, we will speak to it ourselves. But first off, I will pass it to Jutta Buschbaum to speak to participation in the process of the Convention on Biological Diversity. So Jutta.
Yeah, hi. I'm Jutta. I'm from Germany. I'm located northeast of Hamburg, and I'm an independent scientist with my company Statistical Genetics. So I joined the committee last summer, pretty much a year ago, and the first task that came about was submission to the review process of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and Monitoring Framework of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And since then, the committee has been involved quite intensely with the Convention on Biological Diversity in close cooperation with the Legislation and Registration Committee, and due to personal overlap of Dirk Neumann, also with CETAF. So we submitted several comments throughout the year on different aspects. So with regard to above species level, population genetic, about population genetic tools. Then there were questions about the goals and targets themselves. And recently there was a survey on the headline indicators that are proposed. So this is a process that is moving very quickly along and very intensely. And you might have heard that proposed is that in October, the next conference of the parties, COP15, will happen, and that is actually for biodiversity. This is a really big, going to be a really big event. So everybody is very intensely working towards this date. This spring, we inquired with the council, and Paul Meyer is president, if SPNHC would want to become an observer organization with the CBD. And so since then, SPNHC is an observer organization, and Libby and I are currently registered observers for the two subsidiary bodies, Substar 24, which is a subsidiary body on scientific and technical advice, if I remember right, and the other SBI3, which is the subsidiary body on implementation. So these are currently running. They provide a lot of insights about how UN, now I'm missing the word gremium, how a UN body is actually working. And so that is, that is with regard to the science policy interface, this is very interesting, and we are trying to, or we are contributing as much as we can. Also, we are not only contributing to the post-2020 framework, but also have been involved in questions of access and benefit sharing for digital sequence information. You might know that this is an ongoing topic, and also very actively discussed and debated currently. There's a webinar series. You can go and see the recordings. So we have provided, together with Dirk from Lex and Rex, to the discussion on a forum that the CBD opened up. And going to also make a little bit of advertisement for the upcoming second phase of the consultation for the converging the digital and extended specimen concepts of the Alliance for Biodiversity Knowledge, because there one of the topics will be touching on the questions of access and benefit sharing, which is topic 8 on meeting legal and regulatory, ethical, and sensitive data obligations. Yeah, so we have been very active in this field and are going to continue. Looking forward to it. Back to you, Libby.
Thanks, Jutta, and thanks so much for your leadership on all of this. And a quick note that we'll make the links that are hot linked in this presentation available to everybody so that you can dig deeper into this information. Okay, next, a webinar. I'll speak to this one. This past October, we hosted a webinar with Jeremy Kerr, Rob Gropp, Henry McGee, Tara Cornelesi, and Rebecca Johnson on this topic of the biodiversity crisis and what the collections community can do to address it. And that webinar is available on YouTube, and I'll share that link too in the shared doc and in the chat in a sec. And so yeah, it's available for viewing. It was a really great discussion, and we do hope to host more webinars in the future, or to come together in various virtual ways. We found that to be a really positive way to bring some different folks together. So look out for those. Now the wiki, I'll pass it on to Andy Bentley.
Hey everyone. So one of the things that we decided was that people were looking for information to be able to advocate for their collections as conservation tools. So how collections are contributing to conservation and addressing the biodiversity crisis. And so on the wiki page, we have put up two pages. One page is specifically about the committee. So just, listing who the committee is and what our charge is. And then the other one is a resources page that we started putting together, which includes a whole bunch of resources associated with collections and how they're being used in a conservation setting or to address the biodiversity crisis. So there's a whole bunch of links to web pages there. There's also a whole bunch of links to publications that highlight collections' role in this. And we're obviously looking for more input from folks. If you come across a really good paper that highlights how collections are being used, we'd love to see it and add it to this resource so that, you know, collections folks can go to this page and find information that they can use to lobby for their collections role in these kinds of things. So any information that you can provide, any websites that you find that are really good, or any links to publications that you think would be useful to have on this site, please let us know. Just email me and I can add them. Back to you, Libby.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Andy, for all of the work on that. NatureServe Conference Roundtable. This was a recent activity that Austin Mast led, so I'm going to pass it to him.
Thanks, Libby. Yeah, it was a team effort. There were several of us that were organizing this for the Biodiversity Without Boundaries conference that was organized by NatureServe. And we had good attendance. We had approximately 60 participants. Some people came in and left. But we had Sean O'Brien, who's the CEO of NatureServe, among our participants, as well as some other leadership from that organization. And there were two takeaways, I think, although others can share their thoughts on this as well. The two major takeaways seem to be that there's a desire to communicate expert opinion in structured ways about each other's data, and they're getting big into species distribution modeling, and so they were seeking ways to get feedback from our community as we're going about using the models that they produced for our work. So it's really about providing a way to essentially provide annotations back and forth between these two communities. And I'm just assuming that everyone's familiar with the NatureServe community. This is the group that is providing the biodiversity informatics skill set for conservation in the Americas, particularly North America, and especially to the Nature Conservancy. There was also some shared frustration with taxonomy. And there was sort of an expectation that our community would solve it for them. And I think that we communicated effectively that this is a shared pain point for everyone, and that we're all recognizing the importance of investing in cyber infrastructure around, for example, taxon concept mapping. And there was a talk on that from, who was that, Libby? I'm blank on the name.
Yeah, you started that sentence and I was trying to think of it too. It'll come to me.
He's a new assistant professor at ASU, someone who's a leader in this area of taxon concept mapping and our cyber infrastructure in support of it. Yeah, sorry. But it was productive. Gil Nelson and I met with the CEO of NatureServe a few days later. It just turned out that he happened to be in town in Tallahassee, and this came out in a presentation he was giving prior to the roundtable, and had a really productive conversation. We weren't there as representatives of the SPNHC committee. We were talking to him about opportunities, mainly in the area of IDIG-Bio's activities and NatureServe's activities, and collaborations that could emerge there. He's a nice guy. Sean O'Brien, he's a new person who took over. There's been some turnover at NatureServe recently, as some of you might know. Back to you, Libby.
Great, thanks, Austin, and thanks so much for leading this roundtable. Next is a collaboration with GBIF on GR Cycle to increase, which in part to increase regional diversity. And I see that at least Soledad is in the room. I'm not sure if Aline is as well, but I will let you guys take it from here.
Hello. Hello, Libby, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi Sol, we can hear you, yeah.
Hello.
Yep, can you hear us? We can hear you.
I can hear you now.
Great.
Yes.
Yep.
I have a connection. I am at work. So if you can, please, Libby, could you take the, hello?
Yep, we can hear you. You're breaking up a tiny bit, but we can hear you.
I can hear you. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, let's try. So good morning, everybody. As Libby just said, we have a group working in a different situation, a different perspective to the work and to the problems that address the biodiversity crisis. So our idea is to give this different perspective from South America, as we are two members from South America, Alina and I am in Argentina and Alina is in Ecuador. So we find this interest to somehow have a visibility and share our reality, our perspective from South America in relation to collections, which is very different because we have a situation in our museums, in our institutions where collections are still increasing, collections are being closed as well. So it's a, we think also it's the same in Asia, of course, in Africa, in Australia, in other continents with a very low representation. So the idea we have is to promote this campaign to integrate the global network of collections with a better registry, because we realize that collections from South America are low represented and with poor information. So it's somehow a whole continent or an important number of collections that are not so well under the radar. So they are not part of the picture that it's being developed. So we want to promote this idea of the South American countries, at least to begin, to integrate and to put their registries in the registry of scientific collections. So it's of course important. Hi, I am from Colombia, Luz Gomez, so give me a hand here. The importance of contributing to the registry. Maybe that's something that Alina was going to mention. I think it's obvious the importance of the contribution. Hi. So if, I don't know, Libby, do you want to add something, or maybe Luz want to add something? That's more or less what I wanted to mention about our participation in this initiative.
Thank you, Sol. Yeah, I don't have anything to add at the moment. We could save further discussion for the discussion time, which will be in just a minute or two, if that's all right. Thanks. So moving along, I'll mention too, we've had, our committee is really active. We meet regularly throughout the year. We participate in these conferences and have a number of working groups that you've heard from today, including things related to policy, like Utah mentioned, partnership style working groups, which do things like the roundtable that Austin spoke to, and other working groups as well. So we meet fairly regularly and are active in all the ways we possibly can be. So now what I'd like to do is to open it up for discussion, and these questions are also in that shared Google Doc. So at some point I'll probably take this slide off just so that we could see each other speaking, but and I think it's open to what direction the audience would like to take this. I'll read through these discussion questions, but if there are pressing things that are on your minds, then we could take it in any direction we like. These are just some options. So these are things that also we've been thinking about as a committee, and they include how can the collections community contribute to the efforts that result in conservation action. So not just providing data, not just writing reports, but what can we do that results in action? How can we better engage and support the global community of museum professionals, conservation biologists, indigenous communities, and others who are professionally and personally involved with the world's biodiversity and its conservation? And that relates back to what Sol just presented on. What does the collections community perceive to be the biggest barrier as far as engaging with the conservation community and its efforts? And in addition to collections data currently hosted on open data portals, things like GBFID Bio, Atlas Living Australia, et cetera, what can the collections community provide to conservation biologists that would be most useful and productive? So with that, I will stop sharing my screen. And I'm sorry I haven't been able to keep up with the chat. So if folks wanted to turn on their mics and speak directly to anything, that's fine by me. And in the meantime, if we wanted to jump into any one of these questions.
Well, I'll just make a comment that I think that what Sol talked about, people who know me know that collections registries are near and dear to my heart. And I really think that I'm sort of ashamed to say I hadn't really thought much about the biodiversity crisis as a reason for doing this. Usually when I think about it, I'm thinking about just support for collections for one another. But I think this is a very powerful idea, and I'm really glad to see that this committee has been thinking that way, because that might have more traction than just a registry for registry's sake, which is still very valuable, but this does add some heft to that. So we really need to make this a worldwide effort.
Yeah, I know that Sol pointed to Luz, who's also in the room here, and if anybody has deeper thoughts about this, we are interested in really engaging with communities that aren't necessarily always represented in all the ways. Yeah, be it registries and webinars and all of the things. So if that's a direction we want to take this discussion, I think that could be pretty rich.
Hi.
Hi, Luz.
Hi. Okay, I'm from Colombia. I work with flies, forensic importance flies. And for example, in our country, we have a few collections that have support from universities. But we have a lot of diversity, and in this moment we have a group of museums and natural collections of Colombia. We are working with regulations, government regulation, because here we cannot to go to the camp, to the field, to collect the insect if you want, or whatever. If you want, you have to do a lot of work with papers, with regulations, and this is the difficult that we have here, and we have no support, and we work with, for example, in my university, fortunately, we have the support from my boss. but this not happen in all country. We have restrictions, but I think with the project we can improve our collections. In this moment, we are working with digitalizations of data. We have a note, a note from the SIP. SIP is an institution that help us to digitalize our data. And in this moment, we are giving our data to GIF and to SIP to give all world our data, that they can be used in studies of ecology or taxonomy. And we are constructing our page and give the community our data. I don't speak so well English, but I hope you understand a little bit. And I'm so glad to be here to know what we can do and how we can involve in this initiative. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Liz. I'll just mention quickly, I think the meeting notes doc that I shared initially was already populated by a different conference notes. So the one that I just shared now is the one where we will be the one specifically for this one. So please feel free to visit that page. Something that came up in a recent meeting for us when we were thinking about engaging Latin America in deeper ways, I think it was Alina, it could have been you, Sol, apologies, that mentioned even engaging with indigenous communities in a more active way. And I know that's not unique to South America necessarily, but I think that's, when we talk about where the biodiversity hotspots are, where collection activities happen versus where collections are held, at least historically, I think that that opens up a lot of avenues for discussion and conservation action when it comes to the biodiversity crisis, because we are, as evidenced by lots of SPNHC activities, mainly a North American and European focused, or not focused, but populated society. And so thinking more about how we can broaden that. And I know these discussions are happening in other committees as well. And I think it's really, we're at a really good time to be thinking about that. And there are some real applications here when it comes to conservation as well. And I know some folks in the room too have done fieldwork in some of those places and work in collections that are rich in specimens from those places. And so if if there are ideas about how to work more deeply in that arena, I think that'd be an interesting discussion.
In your meetings, have you talked much about Nagoya and the implications for, conservation study or use of collections for conservation? Just wondering.
Yeah, I'm going to pass that to Yuta or Andy, who I think have more direct conversations in that way. I'm not sure if you guys have ideas for that.
Yeah, but talking with Dirk, that is a question that comes up again and again in the whole CBD process for the the global post 2020 global biodiversity framework, because there the goal is to have a global monitoring. But that was also something, that I found became very clear during the Nature Surf conferences. What we are looking at right now is actually we are looking at global pattern or continent-wide patterns. And while in North America, this might not be so the problem with regard to legislation and regulations, because, well, you don't have that many countries. Already in Europe, it is a problem, because when you look at distribution ranges and how they might shift and how interactions between species might change in different parts of the distribution range, these distribution ranges very often cover whole continents or even several continents. So you have to think about shipping specimens from all across the world. And it's an open question. And it is something that we feel is of real importance to the global biodiversity framework under the CBD. So I think it's one of the hot topics. Andy, do you have any additional ideas?
No, I was just going to mention that, you know, Legs and Regs is obviously very heavily involved in debating the Nagoya stuff and DSI and all of those kinds of things. But you're right, it does have tentacles that feed into all of the other committees associated with SPNHC, particularly the Biodiversity Crisis Committee. And so, you know, there are a number of issues that I think we should take on together with Legs and Regs, you know, to try and investigate how this is going to affect species distributions, transport of specimens, all of those kinds of things, for sure.
It just strikes me that this is another area where SPNHC really could take a leadership role. There's so much, you know, emotion and debate on this topic, but there's kind of a need for kind of a clear-eyed, you know, assessment from the collections community of what the challenges, the opportunities and challenges are, and some best practices, you know, because we're still trying to find our way, even though now there are some excellent articles that describe the nuts and bolts of it. But again, I think there's an opening for SPNHC to take much more of a leadership role in this sort of area.
So
yes, hello. I'd like to also bring a topic that I have put also in the Google Doc, and it's how to say it. I think, and something I realized during this extraordinary time we are living is the question on how it is all about communication, because in our everyday life, we realized the communication wasn't that easy game to play as we thought it was. And there is so much misunderstanding between every single person and with groups and so on. I said many times, I don't belong to I am not a scientist, I'm not a biologist. So I have a different view in regard also to this issue. But I think one problem I always recognize, and it doesn't have to do with the question of the language, it's something different, and it's the way how scientists communicate. It's a very, very tall building with many stages. It's a construction, it's a social construction, and scientists develop a great to communicate with another very sophisticated, but common people didn't. So there is something I see is missing in between, and it's something that can link, because for me, as not biologist, it's very clear that the biodiversity crisis and collections are very close related. But I don't know, for instance, for example, for someone like Greta, you know, Greta, she became world famous just a couple of years before the pandemic. I don't know, what does she think about collections? What does she know? Or other people who are very, very deep involved and compromised with the biodiversity crisis. So something is missing in between. And I think maybe some other actors of the knowledge construction could help, and maybe to build relations with others, with other professionals from different not scientists. I'm not saying that. I hope you understand what I mean.
Yeah, I think those really important points, Sol. And when we think about conservation and conservation biologists, I'm sure, face this pretty regularly, where the work is being done and the people that need to be involved with the work aren't necessarily even scientists too. It's people that live there, people that are, you know, engaging in and with biodiversity in ways that are different than scientists. And so therefore thinking about biodiversity in different ways. And so I think there are many levels to what you say. It's, you know, there's communication among scientists, which even that can be kind of fraught with translation issues, translation in the scientific sense, not necessarily the linguistic sense, but a collections or a taxonomist to a conservation biologist to an ecologist, you know, might think about these things slightly differently. And then if you add in somebody who isn't a scientist at all, who doesn't have scientific training, but who is, you know, aware of local biodiversity, or who is at least, you know, living among it in various ways, I think all of those are different levels of communication that are really critical here, that we don't always think about. And we, you know, as a collections community, maybe put out tons of data and think, oh, you know, we could solve the conservation crisis if we just use this more or something. But not that we actually think that, but there's a lot of we need to be thinking about this in different ways. And I think what you described is very accurate. And it's not just about data or about the work itself. I think there are many levels. I see Shelley put a comment in there explaining the issue at the year 7 level. Yeah, I think what you mean by that, or Shelley, do you want to describe that a little more?
Yeah, when we taught science communication, pictured at the lowest common denominator, and that is typically year 7 of the Western, you know, education system. So you have to pitch it way below what you think is understandable. You can't assume that everyone knows what everyone else is talking about. I mean, you talk about biodiversity crisis. Well, people might not understand what biodiversity is, nor may they understand what the crisis might be. So.
Yeah, do you, Shelley, or others in the room have direct experience with that, working where you do around the world?
So indirectly, and not at all. I mean, I'm not experienced the same, but I will observe that, and I'm in a very urban area in a very, you know, fairly progressive part of the country, but I do think there is a strong correlation between, I've seen a correlation between people's awareness of the biodiversity crisis and conservation issues in general, and their interest in doing things like touring a collection. We've seen the numbers go up a lot, and a lot of the people want to ask about extinction. You know, how many extinct species do you have? This is something they understand. So there is, I don't know, you know, I'm not sure it's a typical audience, but there is a connection in people's mind that's being made between collections and conservation. I think it's not hard, must not be too hard for people to make that, because I've had people from all cultures, all walks of life, and that is one thing they come into the collection wondering about. So that's something to try to capitalize on.
Yeah, I was just going to say that too, Barbara. How do we capitalize on that? If that's an inherent or an innate feeling that people have, that connection, how can we work that to our advantage, both in our collections, kind of maybe in where we are, but also in places that maybe are not always at the table. Peleis is in maybe South America and Africa and other biodiversity hotspots where a lot of this collection is happening. How can we deepen those connections? And I think there's, thinking about some of our other discussion questions here, how can, maybe I'll present it as a kind of a two-parter. What can we do as a collections community to really make some more steps towards conservation action and to think more deeply about this topic? And then on the other side, what do we in the room here feel like is a major barrier to doing some of that, to really engaging with conservation efforts? Yeah, Dan. It looks like you're not muted, but I can't hear you. Still no. No. Sorry, it must be some weird audio setting. Yeah. Sorry, Dan, can't hear you. Yeah, Austin, and while Dan's figuring out his audio situation, Austin, if you want to jump in.
Thanks. Yeah, we did some strategic planning as a committee earlier in the year, and I put a link to the SWOT analysis that we did for that into the meeting minutes. I didn't want to add that too early, but wanted to see what other people's feedback was prior to seeing that. I'd be pleased to get feedback on that. It represents the, we were asking some of the same questions as are being discussed here, and that represents a digest of the things that we were coming up with. It might be helpful in the group's thinking on this too.
Thanks, Austin. Yeah, Shelley and Sol mentioned Greta Thunberg, and Shelley mentioned the school strike for climate, and how can we engage with those sorts of movements? Yeah, have you guys have experience or success with? I mean, some of them are really quite young movements, young in terms of how long they've been around, but also in terms of the people that are participating. So, have you guys had interest or pursued engaging with those folks at all?
I haven't, but I'm not quite sure how to start. That's the problem. How do we engage with them? How do we get them thinking about that link between climate and biodiversity crisis? And maybe it's already there, it's just not showing up. But some of these kids, they're in tune with the politics. It's amazing. There's students out there telling off the politicians and telling them they're idiots, and it's great.
No, it is.
Especially here in Australia, where we have, some of the worst carbon emissions on the face of the planet. We're number one for plastics generation and you know, single-use plastics, and it's just horrifying. And we've still got government that wants to open gas-fired power stations and coal, and you know, so how do we influence our leaders as well for some of this, and convince them that, you know, getting the collections community in their limelight as well to help tell the story. I don't know.
Yeah, those are really good points. I'll mention Cindy's comment and then I'll go over to you, Eva. Cindy mentions the potential barrier, or the fact that the perception that collections represent killed specimens, which runs contrary to the principle of conservation and biodiversity preservation. Yeah, and there are a number of articles that have addressed that, right? Like collections are still important, even or more so with all of this, but I think it is very easy to just see it in that superficial way of things are killed, and you know, who are we to go out there promoting conservation while we are actively killing things. But, you know, I think as a community, we are doing what we can to only collect what is necessary and on and do so in ways that are responsible. But yeah, that would be interesting. Cindy, did you want to speak more to that?
No, I think you did a good job. I think the key there is that is a perception that others might have, so that maybe there's some advocacy to do to counteract that perception.
Yeah.
And a related analogy is that often in the hunting community, they are some of the strongest conservationists. And I think a lot of people can relate to that as well, that in order to maintain viable populations for hunting, you need to have a right amount and right quality of habitat and things like that. So, you know, there are, and fishery stocks, right? Like commercial fishing, we need to be able to take so we can eat, but we need to do it sustainably. So I think that there are other recognizable ways to address it, especially when the added benefit is not just for take, but for scientific discovery and dissemination of knowledge.
Yeah, thanks, Travis.
I think the idea to connect with the hunting community is actually a really good one, a good argument. And for the scientific community, I would argue that this is one reason why we need very good digital infrastructures, because we might kill organisms, but then we try to, so to say, get the most out of them, the most data, and make the most use of them. And from this science policy experience, it becomes very obvious that we need fact-based data. I mean, that is really crucial to push the process further. And so that could be an argument too.
Yeah, good point. I'm going to go over to Eva Hoffner now, and then I see Dan has reconnected. So I don't know if you wanted to try again, Dan, but after Eva, we could try that.
Yeah.
So,
hello, I'm Eva. I'm here as an observer today for CTAF. Actually, Jutta was at the CTAF meeting yesterday and invited me spontaneously. Thank you very much. And I would like to come back to.
Joining.
Sorry.
Thank you for joining.
Thanks. Yeah, I would like to come back to this topic of linking up with the younger generation. I think our museums and botanical gardens are an excellent opportunity to do that, because this is really something where we can convey the fascination and the wish to learn more about biodiversity that is declining, and it is such a good opportunity to collaborate with schools. For example, in Berlin, we have a collaboration between the education administration and the botanic garden, and we have 2 teachers permanently located at the botanic garden and performing projects with teachers, but also with school children about sustainability topics, like, for example, what does it mean if we use too much oil from the oil palm and where does it occur and what does it mean for the world? And I think such collaborations reaching out into from the collections community, and you can show them the collections then at the same time. And so I think this makes this link tangible between biodiversity crisis and knowing and collections, and but probably we all have such such possibilities to outreach in some way.
Thanks for bringing up that point, Eva. I see a number of comments in the chat, and if anybody wanted to unmute to follow up on Eva's point, then feel free. I think, yeah, what better place, what better institutions for informal education than some that are represented in this room here, right? With museums and botanical gardens and all of that, even zoos and places that have kind of living biodiversity. So yeah, I think we can leverage that more strongly. And then, right, pair that up with a collections tour and some more direct links to the work we're doing. Yeah.
But I think museums also need to sort of move into the digital age in order to appeal to the younger generation. We need to figure out different ways of getting our message across. You know, the old traditional way of people coming into the museum and walking around doesn't appeal to kids anymore. They need something that's more interactive. And so I think we need to look at the way that we portray that message. And I think messaging is key. You know, the way that you get that message across, I think you need to make it relatable. You need to make that message relatable to them in some way so that they can see the direct effect that they are having, or that the human population is having on biodiversity decline, so that it actually hammers that point home.
There's also, you know, reaching out for allies in unusual places, like artists, people in the humanities, things like that, where you might well find advocates or people who are working on very interesting projects who you could form a partnership with. We've had any number of collaborations, mostly with artists, but people who are working on kind of creative ways to remediation or restoration type of projects, even musicians and so forth. It's hard to control these. They sort of don't come along, but what it means is that maybe it's worth making more of an effort to talk to general groups. You know, I know of a few colleagues, this scares me, but I know of a few colleagues who've gone to kind of like open mic nights at the local brew pub, you know, and taken one specimen along and stood up and given a story, you know, about that. You know, there's lots of creative ways. If everybody found 5 creative ways a year to kind of tell the story, it would have a cumulative effect. But it's hard to kind of give any guidelines because you just have to be on the lookout for these opportunities all the time.
I think that's a great point though, Barbara. And we have on, you know, if we are interested in thinking about resources that the collections community can provide for things like this, I think what you described, and even coming up with 5 creative ways to develop your outreach could be a recommendation, you know, could be a potential resource. And then we pool together some of our ideas, like pub nights, and like, you know, the spinach specimen spotlights at the conferences are always so popular. So kind of like bringing that to different arenas. So yeah, maybe that's something that this committee can think more about as a resource.
I know the Field Museum has partnered with a variety of bars and breweries in Chicago, where we have a collection science night, and a curator, collection manager goes out to the bar and talks, and everyone knows it's going to be on fossils or whatever the topic is. And I know we had fluorescent minerals, and everyone had gin and tonics, and the tonic water, if it's a good tonic water, will fluoresce. So that was kind of nice.
Way to go, Chicago.
It
yeah.
Could be, you know, it could be there's a partner in your institution, because of course it's publicity for them too, whether it's a university or a museum. You might find some help if you indicated an interest. If you have marketing people, you know, publicity people, they might be willing to help with this. They don't understand collections themselves. They're not going to come up with the idea themselves, but if you brought an idea to the table, you might find that they know a whole bunch of people who, you know, who might be willing partners in this.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be grabbing this chat too to bring into our next committee meetings. Some great ideas here. If anybody wants to describe more of what some of the examples that you're listing here, please do.
I'll mention that I dropped a link into the chat that is a collaboration between the Florida Museum of Natural History and the First Magnitude Brewery. They've done a lot of things with butterflies there, and in this one, they actually took the yeast that they used to brew the beer from the butterfly. This is a threatened butterfly, and we had been doing some things with them using the Libraries of Life augmented reality app, such that you could take your can of beer and see the butterfly in your, in your phone. So there are some really interesting things that are happening in this area that are even more collaborative between museums and breweries.
And it looks like they have some nice swag too. If Shelley, did you get a pint glass there? Nice.
They've been huge supporters of biodiversity. You know, the film that they did, I mean, they've been amazing. It's a good model.
I'll read Dan's comment here. So sorry, Dan, that connection is an issue. My gosh, I hear you about in-person meetings. So let's see, he teaches a freshman course, Biodiversity and the Sixth Mass Extinction. We start by defining biodiversity and looking at the previous global extinction events. Then we turn to the significance of collections and taxonomy. I then move into insect biodiversity, my area. The course culminates with an examination of the biodiversity hotspots, and students pick individual hotspot regions to research and provide presentations. Yeah, right. I think we each have our avenues, right, for education and outreach, and finding the best place, the best message, and how to best message that to our audiences. I think that maybe is, to kind of generalize your comment, that's a really good, that sounds like a really cool course too. We have just a few minutes. I know we can maybe go over a tiny bit. There's not, if there's no one after us, but if there are any kind of last thoughts. Hi, Alina. Thanks for joining. If we're kind of wrapping up here, but if you had any thoughts you wanted to make sure got on to the discussion here, please mention them.
Yes, sorry. I ate chicken. I don't know if the chicken was bad, but this morning I've been like very, yeah, bad. But yeah, thank you. Sorry for not joining earlier.
Oh, that's not a problem. I hope you feel better.
Yeah.
It just seems like there's a million ways that people are engaging folks, and we always hear about them, and I'm always astonished and inspired by it. But there's no real clearinghouse of these, except now we have some links. It would be really great because a big part of the UN report on biodiversity loss, education about it was a huge thing, as well as conservation action. And I always say at my institution that this is one area where we can really make a difference, and I think it's true for our whole collections community. So the more ideas we had and could share and modify, the better off we'd all be if there's a way to do that.
Barbara, following up on that, I wonder if we could do another webinar in the fall and put a call out to the spinach community to see how people are doing these, just like not like an education share fair, but kind of in the idea of the education share fair where people like give short, 5-minute talks on efforts they've been doing, whether through social media or through courses or, whatever, because I think there's such a wide range of what people are doing. And that might make a fun, like 90-minute webinar, because we talked about doing like another, like making specimen spotlight just a thing at one point, because everybody really enjoyed those and they seemed to work really well on Zoom last year. So maybe we could organize that as something part of this committee, and then doing it virtually would also allow a lot more people to participate.
Yes,
Brilliant,
I think
yeah.
it's a great idea. I wanted just to mention, I think last year, Barbara, you gave a talk about herbaria. It was, I think, something very interesting, and I identified as a different approach. It was how you integrate, how you talk about the collections, about the barrier, about many things, but always and everything cross with other topics. At least down here in Argentina, we are going through a very strong women's movement, as also I understand in the States and in other regions. And the fact of bringing the role and the presence of women in your presentation and how you introduce that topic, I think that's something very powerful, because whenever we can cross the different interests behind a same goal, it's a good way to spread the idea. So I think the idea of webinars it's great, and it's a resource that stays in the web, so you can always share it again and again. And I was telling about this video that was shown in the Museum of Chicago about collecting specimens. I don't know if you heard about it, or you have seen the exhibit. That was 2017, I think. I have the video. I can send it to you. It's filmed from the screen, but it's also a very good example of how to approach to the theme and the idea of producing resources, digital resources, videos, whatever. It's I think very useful.
I think that Saul makes an interesting point about reaching out. This is where this committee's work kind of intersects the IDEA committee, and making it, making everybody feel a part of this, not just some old dead white guys who did stuff a while back. Highlighting the role of everybody who has contributed. It gives everyone more of a sense of ownership. And what she's referring to is, I wrote a book about herbaria, and I've been giving a bunch of talks, and it is true that that is what people respond to a lot, is the story of the people, especially if it's people they can identify with. So there's nothing really easier and more fun for us to do than to identify those people that we know of, or that we've worked with, or that we have read about, and find a way to tell their story and be very, very engaging.
These are all great points. Libby had to leave, so she asked me to continue moderating. What I would suggest is that we aim to wrap things up in the next 5 minutes, just to respect everyone's time. There's been a lot of great stuff in the chat. I've just saved the chat, and I'll try to do that again and add that to the notes in the Google Doc. If you have not yet added your name to the Google Doc with your contact information, please do that. I can add that link to the chat again for those of you that joined after it had been last shared. Let me find that. Any other thoughts? I do want to ask, is there a, is Paul still on? Paul's still on. Paul, Paul, you're the current president of SPNH, right?
Yep.
Okay. There was some conversation about considering this as a full committee, moving it to a full committee from a sessional status. Can you just give us an update on what has been done in that area or not done?
I guess I received a request, or at least the idea that it should be moved up. I think I I don't know exactly what's been done. I guess what we need is a the committee the brochure about what the committee does, and just a little explanation on why, and we can run it by the council.
You can see a model for that if you look in the document that you can download from the Spinach website about the various committees. It's basically a description and a charge. I suspect we have it because it was done when it was approved as a sessional committee. I couldn't tell you right offhand if there's something more you need to add for a full committee, but it couldn't be very much. So I think you probably already have what you would need.
So this is something that you definitely want to have happen?
I think that we've demonstrated in the last hour that there's a lot of enthusiasm on this topic. This is an area that we should be playing a major role in. And you know, if we're not doing that, some other organization is going to step forward and do it. But I think that Spinach is the right organization to be representing our community.
Okay. Well, maybe just review the document on this committee and make any updates that you need and any changes in leadership or who's the secretary and stuff like that, and send it to me, and then we'll we can get that approved.
Austin,
and what would be, go ahead, Talia.
I was just gonna say, I think that's one of the things that we were still trying to figure out was if we needed to have like the committees have to have officers like a secretary or something. Do we just need to have a chair, right? And that's it. Okay.
Yeah. And is the timing right for this to be handled today since the council meeting's later? Or would it be like then off till the next year cycle?
We can take an electronic vote on that anytime, so there's no rush to get it done today. It'll probably be easier not to do it today in reality, and we'll just send it out on email.
Usually we get a vote done within a few days. I mean, it's not a onerous process.
Yeah, I'd take a look at the committee description, the sessional committee description in the leadership manual, and then maybe look at the committee descriptions of standing committees to see, you know, if you feel like there's anything you need to add to your current sessional committee description. So check the Spinach website in the leadership manual page.
That was the word I was floundering for so badly, was description, committee description. Thank you, Cindy.
I couldn't remember leadership manual. I could see the document, but I couldn't remember what it was called.
Okay, I'll pass that information off to Libby, and as chair, I imagine that she'll lead the charge. Any other thoughts? Or I think that there are so many of us that find joy in this particular topic, and hope and promise and meaning. So I hope that we can continue to facilitate that as a committee and provide opportunities in the next year for everyone to feel proud to be a part of this community.
Might be a bit late, but maybe one quick comment at the moment, and the Biodiversity Crisis Committee submitted views already, is ongoing the review of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework indicators and monitoring elements. And so it would surely be a good opportunity to see in which areas we could provide data to increase visibility of collections and taxonomy.
Thanks, Dirk. The Utah, I believe, do you have any, is Utah still with us?
Yeah, I am.
Do you have perspective on the means by which the committee is handling that particular need?
Yeah, so one plan that we have is so working with where everything is about indicators. I was wondering, or like talking with several people, we are wondering if we shouldn't have a set of indicators that can quantify collections and collections work, collections human resources and their partners. So I'm always inspired, like there's a lot of discussion about how to finance the global biodiversity framework and the monitoring, and different possibilities are put forward. And recently, I think at the beginning of the year, the Dasgupta report came out. Maybe you have heard it, a UK report about environmental economic accounting. So that were economists who took a look at nature accounting. That's what they call it. And I find this idea fascinating, where you take a look at how much nature does a country preserve and kind of find a way like to account for that and count that kind of on the plus side for a country. And I was thinking, or we are thinking, so why not take like the collections and the collections community and put that on the plus side of the country? And because this is something like a country that promotes collections, helps their own biodiversity and the conservation of the biodiversity. So we are currently working on a presentation for IDIC Bio for the conference, and going to present our ideas there. So, yes.
One thing worth looking into is benefit sharing. So negotiators, key negotiators, put it friendly by saying we are the nice to have ones. And I think without taxonomy, biodiversity monitoring is without backbone. So they need the taxonomic expertise, because otherwise their baselines and input and monitor is quite doubtful. The problem that we have at the moment, all the services that we provide by hosting guests, by offering training, by giving access to collections, by hosting PhD, is not recorded. And thus it is very difficult to not value it, but to valuate it. So to give it a dimension, and it might be worth looking into that as well. So that is not something specifically where you would monitor biodiversity, but capacity building and training.
Thanks so much, Dirk and Jutta, for bringing these to the group's attention. There is a committee meeting that will be next Wednesday, and I would encourage both of you to potentially join, and we can hash this out even more. If it's even more urgent than being dealt with next Wednesday, we can always do it via email. But I do want to recognize that we've come to the end of our time slot, and thank everyone for joining us. And do get to that Google Doc if you haven't added your name. We'd love to keep you in the loop. Thanks so much, everyone.